Welcome back to Getting Caught Up. 2 years ago, Americans witnessed probably the biggest self-inflicted brand implosion in U.S. corporate history, the Bud Light-Dylan Mulvaney debacle. No doubt you remember it. Bud Light sent a commemorative beer can to transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney with her photo on it depicting her as Audrey Hepburn. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Kid Rock used his machine gun to shoot up cases of Bud Light in his backyard and posted video of it on social media. Sales of Bud Light instantly plummeted, and the backlash was not only fierce, it was long-lasting. For months on end, sales of Bud Light continued to plummet, leading the company's stock price to collapse. Bud Light once had a stranglehold as the top-selling beer in America. After the partnership with Mulvaney, it quickly plunged to third, losing tremendous amounts of market share in the process. And eventually people lost jobs due to Americans' outrage over the ill-advised campaign. For this episode, I had a chance to talk with Anson Frericks, the author of Last Call for Bud Light, The Fall and Future of America's Favorite Beer. Anson is a former Bud Light executive who joined Anheuser-Busch not long after the company was acquired by InBev, an international beer conglomerate. Anson worked at Anheuser-Busch for 11 years, and he saw a fiasco like the Dylan Mulvaney debacle coming from miles away. And he chronicles in great detail the decline of what was once, by far, America's top-selling beer. It seems like the implosion happened fast when the Dylan Mulvaney partnership erupted in April 2023. And it did. But as Anson describes in his book, the groundwork had been laid for such a catastrophe long before 2023. So we talked all about how he decided to write about his 11 years at the company, his frank and candid depiction of people he worked with, some of whom he described in glowing terms. Others he described as feckless corporate monkeys. We discussed how the fateful partnership was allowed to be approved, particularly at such an already simmering time in American culture. How he was shot down by his bosses for suggesting what would have been a far less controversial partnership. We touched on how the company has continued to botch the response to the controversy and why he thinks it's important for the company leaders to be held accountable and ultimately to apologize to Bud Light customers. Anson thinks InBev, a Euro-Brazilian company, should sell Anheuser-Busch back to an American owner or ownership group. I asked him who he thinks would be a good buyer, and he had a very interesting idea. We also look back at some of the most memorable Bud Light ad campaigns over the years that catapulted the beer to being the top-selling brand in the first place. Quick reminder, please give this episode a like, comment, or share to help with its visibility so I can keep bringing you conversations with interesting people like Anson Frericks. Anson left Anheuser-Busch about a year before the whole controversy to launch a new venture. He and his buddy from high school, Vivek Ramaswamy, launched Strive Asset Management to become a counterbalance in the corporate landscape to the colossal asset managers out there that pressure corporations like InBev into making stupid decisions that ultimately cost hardworking people jobs and lead to a loss of value for shareholders. We talked a little bit about that and how he publicly challenged Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff about some of the company's policies. I can't recommend Last Call for Bud Light enough. There's a link in the show notes below if you want to pick it up. The Dylan Mulvaney debacle is really just a small part of the book. You'll learn a ton about an iconic American brand that has been around since 1852, almost 175 years. He's just a super interesting and very cool guy, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. So here he is, Anson Frericks. Welcome to the podcast, Anson Frericks. Good to meet you. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And here is your book that you've written. Awesome book. This is your first book, Last Call for Bud Light, The Fall and the Future of America's Favorite Beer. I just read it. It's a great, how about that? Your first book, it's a pretty wild topic to take on. And you didn't even really intend to be an author, I don't think, in life.
No, I mean it's wild. If even you told me 5 years ago that all of a sudden I'd have a book out about Bud Light would have lost its crown as the biggest beer brand in the U.S. and to some degree I would kind of be at the center of what happened and what went wrong with not only Bud Light but broader corporate America. I would have said no way. But life works in mysterious ways sometimes. So here we are.
Yeah. So, when did the idea hit you to write a book about this? Because one of the things I'm amazed about is that it was only 2 years ago, almost as we're recording this, almost exactly 2 years ago that this whole thing blew up with the Dylan Mulvaney fiasco and whatnot. I can't even believe it. It seems like it was a lifetime ago in some ways. But when did it hit you that this
Yeah, it
was
was
the
crazy.
story?
So the partnership with Bud Light, it happened on April 1st of 2023. So it was April Fool's Day of 2023. I had actually left Anheuser-Busch about a year before that. So my quick background was so out of college, I started my career in finance. I was working in a private equity firm out of undergrad. I went back to business school. Out of business school, I was recruited by the guys at 3G Capital, which it's a group of kind of Brazilian bankers that have really consolidated a lot of the beer companies globally. They started in South America, consolidated kind of South American beer. They bought InBev over in Europe, which owns brands like Hogard and Left, Stella Artois. And then they had recently bought Anheuser-Busch. So this was in 2008, 2009. They bought Anheuser-Busch in the United States. A lot of people don't know that Anheuser-Busch is actually owned by a Belgian company called InBev. And then coming out of business school, they kind of recruited me to come work for what they said was the world's largest private equity firm that happens to sell beer. And I don't know, I was 26, 27 years old at the time. I liked a lot of craft beer. It was kind of a cool pitch that they had. So I showed up. So I was there for about 11 different years. I left in 2022, which kind of we can get into when I saw kind of the company was changing a lot. Corporate America in general was embracing a lot of more, I guess, socially progressive ideals. I was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. And I don't know if you recall in 2021, Governor Kemp signed this law that says you need an ID to vote. That didn't seem like that crazy to me. I think 30 states have that law, but corporate America's response to it was kind of crazy. This was kind of in the post George Floyd world. Firm called BlackRock, world's largest asset manager, came out and said we're against this. It's the biggest investor in companies like Coca-Cola and Delta. So they both all of a sudden came out against this and said we're against this law. Major League Baseball canceled the All-Star game in 2021, which is in Atlanta, Georgia, over this. And when I was president of Anheuser-Busch at the time in the U.S., and they moved that All-Star game to Coors Field in Denver, where I didn't sell any beer, so I
Yeah.
wasn't happy about that. But anyway, so this was I saw a lot of these problems happening. So I left kind of Anheuser-Busch a year before the Dilly Mulvaney partnership to actually start a company called Strive Asset Management, which was going to be investing into companies and having them focus more on their mission and not necessarily on social and progressive issues. So kind of my worlds kind of collided a year later, where this company that I co-founded called Strive was telling companies like explicitly to stay out of politics. That would just be better for their business. And then my old employer, Anheuser-Busch, where I've been the president, became the poster child of what went wrong when businesses getting involved more with social political issues. And so as the sales were declining and the company was losing millions of customers, I was commenting a lot on this. And a lot of people reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd love to have you work with me because I'm thinking about writing a book on this." And after so many people were reaching out, I said, "You know what? Why don't I just write the book on this?" And I always liked writing. I enjoyed doing it. I wrote certain newsletters kind of at certain times in my life. So I said, "Hey, why don't I just take a stab at telling the whole story about what went wrong with Anheuser-Busch and Bud Light and how it lost its crown as America's favorite beer?"
Yeah, interesting. So people were they were already sort of targeting this as a great book idea, and you were like, wait a second, you probably thought I should write this book. I was right there for the whole almost the whole thing, right?
Yeah, I mean that's it. I mean, if you think about some of like the most cataclysmic sort of brand failures in history, people go like first is probably New Coke. When Coca-Cola in the 80s they came out and they said that we were going to have new Coke, new formula, and the consumer pushback was instant. It was immediate, and at least the New Coke executives they quickly admitted their error, their mistake. They went back to the regular formula and everything was fine. I think probably since then there hasn't been as impactful of a consumer sort of I don't know if it's a boycott or a consumer just pushback than when you saw the Bud Light-Dylan Mulvaney partnership. And so I think that there was just a story to be written that was not only about Anheuser-Busch, which was historically, I mean, an amazing American-owned company that dates back to pre-Civil War times.
Yeah.
It was run by members of the Bush family for 150 years. Then it was taken over, kind of what went wrong with all of that. And then how did the company, which used to be, I mean, Bud Light used to be just be, funny, humorous, easy to drink, easy to enjoy was its mission. How did it become at really the center of one of the most, I would say, politicized issues of the last couple of years, which is more along the rights of things like, I don't think people care how, frankly, people identify or how they dress, but there are a lot of transgender issues related to biological males competing in sports against biological women. Is that ethical and fair or not? Should you do gender affirmation care on kids under the age of 18? And these were just real hot political issues that all of a sudden Bud Light and its brand were at the forefront of. And so it tells the story of how did that happen, but also how did broader corporate America get involved in more social and political issues of the last couple of years. Why was that sort of bad for business? I think, in my view, why it was bad for our democracy, and what does the future hold for all businesses? How can we get back to focusing on really the customers? Why that's going to be good for, I think, the shareholders of companies in the long term, and why it's also going to be good for citizens of this country.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you did that was really great in this book is just describe that, like you just mentioned, uh, almost 150 years run by the Bush family. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, 1852 is when it was founded. That's incredible. Um,
Yeah, and
for
it's amazing.
the
You know, it,
durability of that brand is unbelievable. Of Anheuser-Busch, I mean, Bud Light was introduced in 82, but just the overall, the Anheuser-Busch brand durability is amazing in American history.
yeah, it's amazing. You think of sort of these iconic American families, Rockefellers, Carnegies, Vanderbilts. I mean, like
Yeah,
you'd put the Bushes probably in there of these sort of like iconic business scions. And the Bush family, they started around the same time that a lot of those other families did. But up until 2008, you actually still had Bushes that were running Anheuser-Busch,
yeah,
whereas you haven't had Carnegies or Vanderbilts or Rockefellers or Morgans running those companies for decades or maybe even a
yeah.
century. So it was really this iconic sort of American great entrepreneurial success story, and it had amazingly lasted through four generations before, kind of August Bush the fourth kind of screwed it up a little bit. But
Yeah.
there was a fun ride until then.
It was. All those bushes seem to be characters unto themselves. Interesting,
Yeah,
interesting personalities. Especially, I mean, I guess what's his name? Adolphus Bush was the first one, right? I mean, he was really just an aggressive marketer and just everything. He did everything pretty much.
yeah, he was an amazing marketer, but I mean, it was a company that lived life to the fullest and almost excessive from early on. I think
Yeah.
one of the stories of even the founder Adolphus Bush, there was a banker early on in the history of Anheuser-Busch that was not going to give him a loan because they thought that he lived too flashy and too lavishly, and he was going to squander all the bank's money with what they bought. And then with successive generations, I mean, the Bush family, they had an amazing ancestral home. It's still there in St. Louis, called Busch Gardens, but they had I mean on their this like family home. They had elephants and they had zebras and they had giraffes and they had all types of crazy animals that were running around. Um, you had August Bush the fourth. I mean, it got really bad at the end, but he was the last sort of Bush family CEO. But he might be one of the first people in history that got a helicoptering under the influence. You've heard of driving under the influence, but this is a guy that landed his helicopter at a fertility clinic and
Um,
was arrested when he came out of it, and said, you just can't land your helicopter wherever you want. And was in a interesting state of mind. So the family had a very interesting history to it, with each one kind of adding their own little wrinkle to what they were doing. But you got to give them credit. They survived prohibition, they survived
Unbelievable, right?
depressions, they
Yeah.
survived you name it by being interesting, innovative, understanding the American consumer, created incredible iconic brands, incredible advertising campaigns. Really got sort of what it was to be American. I always said that I don't know if there's more of an iconic brand than if I think of like Budweiser. Budweiser, 150-year-old brand, that's been through this country, civil wars and world wars, and you kind of name it, it almost is American a bottle. And there's something about
Yeah.
Clydesdales and beer, and it's got a cool history to it. So I was glad to be a part of it for 11 years. And frankly, I mean, it was sad to see some of the issues that have happened with it over the last couple of years. And I've had, of course, my frustrations with the current management team and how they have kind of run the company over the last couple of years. But I know optimistic that there's a future for them. If only they're willing to make a couple changes.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Because the book has been out now, I guess just a little bit more than a month. So these people have had a chance to read it, I'm assuming. And you really don't pull any punches in the book. Some people you describe in glowing terms, like that guy Andy Goler, I believe is how you pronounce his name. And then you have others who, you were less, and I don't think you did it in an insulting way, but you were just in a very candid way. I think Alex Macisis, I'm not sure about the name pronunciations here. Michelle Ducaris, who I think is still the CEO. I mean, I looked these guys up. You didn't change any names, by the way. Sometimes in these books, they change the names to like avoid um, to avoid whatever, offending people or something. But all the names are the same. I mean, you talk about those guys. Brendan Whitworth, is still there, I think, and He was the CEO, I guess the North America CEO when the whole thing
Yeah.
exploded. And then, of course, Alyssa Heinerscheid, is it? Who is the marketing VP behind the whole thing. Have you heard from any of these people? What's their reaction? I imagine Andy Goller was quite happy. You described him as a legend at Budweiser or at Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah, Andy sent me a picture, and he sent me a thumbs up, and he bought a copy of the book. So, some of those folks that I've heard from a lot of the wholesalers, the distributors at Anheuser-Busch, that were almost like, "Man, thank you so much. This is a very cathartic book that
Yeah,
you wrote," because sometimes it's been a frustrating kind of 15 years, I think, since InBev did buy Anheuser-Busch, and there's been sort of a lot of ups, and I think most recently a lot more downs along the way. Some of the other folks, unsurprisingly, haven't necessarily heard from them. But I think any real honest book, you need to be candid. And I wrote this
yeah,
book to hopefully be approachable, hopefully be funny, hopefully have some laughs, but also to be like an honest account of what really did happen is part of probably the greatest marketing disaster maybe in American business history, but definitely since New Coke. And hopefully as a warning to other folks who are running large corporations where, millions of customers, billions of dollars of revenue, tens of thousands of employees, a lot of shareholders. I mean, there's a lot of people that get impacted when decisions are made, and not only when decisions are made. There's a lot of bad decisions that happen in companies, but even more so, I think what I really wanted to highlight was most of the problems that have happened over the last 2 years with Anheuser-Busch losing all their value and customers, it happened from the response and their lack of response. And I think this is also a case study in crisis management, in leadership. And so when that happens, like, you do have to hold people accountable.
yeah,
I'm still a shareholder of Anheuser-Busch, so
yeah.
therefore, you got to hold people accountable when the stock is off by billions of dollars in market cap since this happened, and there really haven't been any fundamental changes.
Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, talking about laughs, though, one thing that I remember that actually did make me laugh was you're describing Brendan Whitworth and his appearance on CBS, and we can get more into the details of it later. But you described him as a corporate monkey who was put in a cage to perform, and I was, I laughed. I actually did go. You can, well, we'll talk about it more when we get to that. But no word from him on that because that I could see. I didn't think it was done in an insulting way, but I could see how someone might take that as fighting words or something.
Yeah, I mean, knowing Brendan, I'm sure that he probably did, but I think the description's accurate. And
Yeah.
I haven't spoken with Brendan, but actually one of the other, I would say, characters or at least people in this whole story has been Kid Rock. If you recall,
Yeah.
after Bud Light's partnership with Dylan, one of sort of the first really viral responses with Kid Rock taking an AR-15 and then shooting up a bunch of cases of Bud Light.
Grandpa's feeling a little frisky today. Let me say something to all you and be as clear and concise as possible. Fuck Bud Light and fuck Anheuser-Busch. Have a terrific day.
Yes.
And funny enough, when Kid Rock, he went on Rogan's podcast a couple months ago, and Rogan was asking him, he basically said, "Hey man, what's it like being the guy that killed Bud Light?" And he went on this whole rant about what happened. But even more importantly, he said, "You know what? It was interesting. I was at a Ultimate Fighting Championship fight, and I actually ran into Brendan Whitworth at the fight because Bud Light's a big sponsor of that." They shared a couple words, and then Brendan invited, I think, Kid Rock to come to the office or vice versa, and then they actually hung out. And Kid Rock recounts this entire story where he literally asked him about that CBS interview. And he was like, "Man, like, why didn't you just say this was a huge mistake and we screwed up and, and apologize and move on?" And this is what Brendan allegedly told Kid Rock. He's like, "I couldn't. I was coached on what I had to say and I couldn't
Okay.
say that." And
Yeah.
I think that's part of this whole problem about the book about like why, my whole book, Last Call for Bud, it answers that question of like, why couldn't he say what most people just want to say? Like, yeah, man, you get screwed up. It was very clear. He's lost millions of customers, billions of dollars of shareholder value, thousands of employees have been fired, like suppliers have shut down. I mean, like, real consequences have happened
Sure.
because of this action. You guys need to take accountability for it. But he couldn't because of all the commitments that the firm had made to what I call this broader stakeholder capitalism, environmental social governance, diversity, equity, inclusion. this whole agenda that had popped up in corporate America over the last 5 to 10 years for reasons we get into if we want to, and that's why he was between what I was told like this rock and a hard place. And when you're faced with difficult decisions, I think I use this quote in the book. I really like what Teddy Roosevelt says.
Yeah.
The best decision is the right one. The next best decision is the wrong one, and the worst decision is just no decision at all. And that's where the company really went wrong. Is that they tried to walk in the middle of this cultural minefield where they didn't want to upset more of the progressive and call it for in simplicity like democratic drinkers who wanted them to say no, we're going to do more partnerships with people like Dylan Mulvaney, even though Dylan became incredibly controversial and was at the Joe Biden White House advocating for a lot of the issues we talked about earlier. But nor could they apologize to more of their traditional conservative loyal drinkers that just wanted Bud Light to be what Bud Light always was, which was a little bit of like fratty and maybe somewhat out of touch but humorous. But that's what like Bud Light kind of uniquely was and distinctly was. Just let Bud Light be Bud Light.
I mean, I think that was one of the biggest miscalculations, though, that they were going to offend Democrat drinkers, right? Like I think you're talking about a fringe, tiny, like less than 1% that feel that strongly. Like I think even most Democrat, and you talk about it in the book, actually, studies have shown that they were almost Democrats and Republicans drank Bud Light almost in like exact, split
I mean, it was
numbers.
literally that's why it was the biggest beer brand in the country because it was uniquely enjoyed by Democrats and Republicans, like most because it had never gotten involved in political issues. It was
Right.
always about backyard barbecues and sports and music festivals and those issues. And I even think that most of the call it the progressive consumers that wanted Bud Light to come out and say, no, we're going to do more partnerships with Dylan. This Bud Light said, hey guys, authentically, this just didn't make sense. And obviously, we didn't want to get involved in a big political controversy. Therefore, this was a mistake of a partnership. Nothing against Dylan. We screwed up, but we're just not going to be doing partnerships with Dylan Mulvaney, but we're also not going to be doing partnerships with Donald Trump. We're just not going to touch
Yeah.
politics anymore. So,
Yeah.
and if they said that early on and then said, hey, we've hired Shane Gillis, he's now our new person, I don't think anybody would have cared. But it's because they never made a decision either way. That's why sort of consumers on the right continue to this day to boycott Bud Light because still no one has come out and clearly either apologized to that base or articulated what Bud Light's going to be. But also a lot of drinkers on the left, including a lot of gay pride parades or a lot of human rights campaign, a lot of other more leftist activist organizations to this day have suspended Bud Light from participating in some parades or participating in some of their campaigns. So they ended up trying to be everything to everyone and ended up being nothing to anybody and
Yeah.
lost a massive amount of volume and share.
It's crazy. So I watched that interview and you said it was uncomfortable in the book and it definitely felt that way. No doubt Brendan Whitworth, I mean, who wants to be in that situation? Totally unenviable. However, he was given multiple chances. They straight up asked him, they wanted to ask him a little less indirectly whether it was a mistake. Then they straight up said, was this a mistake? And would you do it again? And he just dodged the question.
Given the moment we're in, this moment in America with trans issues at the top of a Republican social or conservative political agenda, knowing what you know now, if you could go back, would you send this can to this one person again?
There's a big social conversation taking place right now, and big brands are right in the middle of it. And it's not just our industry or Bud Light. It's happening in retail. It's happening in fast food. And so for us, what we need to understand is, deeply understand and appreciate is the consumer and what they want, what they care about, and what they expect from big brands.
So this is part of why you're getting it from all sides, because I asked you, would you do it again? And people on the trans rights side of things, supporting that community, want you to say, yes, of course, we want that fortitude. And people on the right would criticize you for saying yes. So where are you on the issue? I mean, was this a mistake?
Bud Light has supported LGBTQ since 1998. So that's 25 years. And as we've said from the beginning, we'll continue to support the communities and organizations that we've supported for decades. Mm-hmm. But as we move forward, we want to focus on what we do best, which is brewing great beer for everyone, listening to our consumers, being humble and listening to them, making sure that we do right by our employees, take care and support our partners, and ultimately make an impact in the communities that we serve.
And I know, like he told Kid Rock that he was coached that way, but why do you really think he didn't answer the question honestly? He could have just done it and gone against how he was coached. Do you think he would have been fired if he had done that?
Unfortunately, he probably would have, because this is something that was obviously went above Brendan's head. Again, told Kid
Right.
Rock that I was coached and I could only say
Yeah.
certain things. And unfortunately, this is one of the things I talk about in the book as well, but really a lot of the company's identity and I think sort of like historical like understanding of sort of the customer base and where it was lost when in 2015 the company moved sort of their sales and marketing headquarters from St. Louis, Missouri, more the geographical center of the country, and has around St. Louis you have farm fields, but urban centers, suburbs, and they moved it to New York City. So since 2015, 2016, moved this sort of entire kind of sales and marketing headquarters to New York. When they did that, they brought in totally different legal teams and marketing teams, started doing different partnerships. And the office was right downtown. It's in Chelsea. It's right downtown New York,
Yeah.
and they've made a lot of commitments to organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, which says, hey, you guys need to do at least 3 commercials a year that cater to the LGBTQ plus community. And they cozied up with big asset management companies like BlackRock, which was pushing a lot of environmental social governance funds and was looking at diversity, equity, inclusion metrics at the company. And then also they're just a little bit more European. I mean, they're owned by a European company as well. And in Europe, they have a lot of restrictions they put on companies in terms of what they can say and what they can do. And there's sort of a broader discussion, even going on right now between Europe and the US about what's the purpose of a corporation. In Europe wants corporations to be essentially like social justice
Yeah.
organizations and working with governments on all types of social policies. In the US, we're saying, no, like let business be business. Business needs to focus on innovation and customers and products, and let business be business. But then the government's going to deal with all these other issues. So there's this sort of competing philosophies. And that's why Brendan, he was not able to actually come out and clearly say that Bud Light had screwed up and that they made a mistake, because they've made all these commitments to a lot of social and progressive organizations. They're controlled more by a Belgian-based company that has also commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental, social governance standards as well. And so he was basically told, I have no doubt from the board on down, because I'm sure that's at this point went to the board level of, since Bud Light, the biggest beer brand in the United States, was shedding customers. The stock had lost $20+ billion of market cap. Like, this was a board level down, essentially telling him what he could and could not say.
Okay. So one thing I kept thinking about as I read it, and then when I watched that interview, had he just gone off and done probably what was the right thing to do, despite what he was being told, and had he been fired, then I think that would have magnified and just amplified the controversy that much more, right? Like, and I wonder, he probably obviously he wants to have a job and have his career, but I mean, what would it have been then? How bad would it have gotten? Would Bud Light even be around today? I guess it would be, but
No, I mean, I actually think that the sales would be a lot better. I mean, you're going into July 4th weekend. So he had this, he did a CBS interview. This
so you think
was,
if he had just apologized and got fired, that would have helped the company. That's interesting.
I think it would have helped the company, because I would have said, I think that people would have said, all right, he helped the company, and well, I take that back. If he had said it and then gotten fired, I think that, yes, would have been bad for the business, because then it would have been very clear that
People would have killed
Anheuser-Busch
them.
wants to become the next Ben and Jerry's, and they've at least told half their customer base, we don't
Yeah.
want them. You're
Yeah.
correct. That would have been bad. But I think that if he would have gone on there and said, "Hey, we screwed up," and apologize, and you name it, it always takes time to fire somebody anyway, so
Yeah.
they're probably not going to do it immediately. But my guess is they would have seen a spike and a rebound in sales, and he actually probably would have saved his job. And unfortunately, he didn't have the courage to say that. That was his choice. But now he's still, at this point, looking at a business that, prior to the Dylan Mulvaney controversy, you had the United States did $15 billion of revenue for this business and $6 billion of profits. And then last year, the US, they did, I think, I don't know, 12 or 13 billion of revenue and like 4.5 billion of profits. So you've just seen a massive erosion of
Yeah.
the company's revenue and profits here in the US. Bud Light, which went from the number 1 beer in the US, is now, I think, the number 3 beer
Wow.
in the US. And just to put this into context, I think before this happened, Anheuser-Busch was doing almost 20, or Bud Light was selling, I think, around like 25 million barrels of beer a year in the United States. Last year, I think they sold 15 million of
Wow.
Bud Light. And then so this year they'll sell less. which is kind of crazy. And even if you go back 10 years ago, I mean, they used to be selling 40 million barrels of Bud Light. So if you go back 10 years, they've gone almost from like 40 million barrels of Bud Light that to this year they'll do less than 15. And
That's a collapse. That is a collapse.
I mean, collapse. And what's sad about this as well is that Brendan's kept his job, Michelle's kept his job, but there's been thousands of people at Anheuser-Busch that have lost theirs.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands if you include the number of wholesalers that sell their products. And there's 500 independent family-owned wholesalers that sell their products across the country, and then all the suppliers that give them cans or bottles or others that have lost jobs as well. So it's a really sad cautionary tale of, unfortunately, choices have consequences.
Cautionary tale. I couldn't help but think that the entire time I was reading it. I kept thinking two things. I kept thinking this is a cautionary tale about globalism coming into America and just the absolutely destructive effects it can have on the country. I don't know if you intended it to be that way, but that's just that was one big takeaway I had. The other was just that it's essentially a textbook on how to not market an iconic brand. I mean, I imagine that this will be probably taught in marketing classes in colleges, this book, or parts of it at least,
Yeah, no, we're getting a lot of good reception on the book, and a lot of schools have reached out, not only to teach the book and teach the material, but they're just interested in having a sort of a broader discussion.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's definitely a cautionary tale. There was a period of time, I mean, over the last 20, 30 years, really, when I think the Berlin Wall fell and then kind of communism collapsed in Russia, where we really raced towards globalization. And there was the famous Thomas Friedman, "The World is Flat" book, and we were outsourcing a lot of jobs. Obviously, that hollowed out a lot of American manufacturing, wasn't good. But I think in recent years, people have not only questioned like the shipping of American jobs overseas, which obviously didn't help us, but then also the number of countries that are coming in here and operating in the U.S. and putting in different value systems in the U.S. that might not be consistent. If you think about what's going on with TikTok right now. So TikTok, owned by the Chinese government, a lot of essentially research and data showing that Chinese government's collecting a lot of data and information on Americans. And that's very un-American policy. You have a big company and they might be influencing sort of the material that they're showing Americans here. It's becoming a national security threat, and they have to sell that business. I think in the same way, actually, with Anheuser-Busch, we have to sort of think about, I think InBev has to think about, if they are going to be more in tune with what's called European values and wanting businesses to get more involved in social and political issues, that might not be the best thing for their U.S. business arm. And maybe it makes sense for them to sell their U.S. business arm and sell it back to maybe American owners or American investors that can just do a better job of catering to American consumers, American values, focusing on shareholders, customers, and not getting involved in these issues. So we're kind of seeing not only things like President Trump trying to bring jobs back to the U.S., but I think even just thinking about what are sort of the values that we want companies promoting here in the U.S. We want technology, innovation, meritocracy, or do we want, again, some of these more European and Chinese values? Do we want censorship? Do we want sort of DEI? Do we want social justice organizations? I don't know, but I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so.
So that's interesting. You brought up Trump there, and I also read this book in the context of the Trump era, and one thing I noticed, you talked a lot about how prior to the acquisition, or even right after the acquisition, after InBev acquired Anheuser-Busch, they had always looked to America for inspiration on how to do things and everything. And then once they got this iconic American brand, they started doing things their own way, and they downplayed what made the company so successful in the first place, and they kept doing it in many different ways. Some of it was actually good, right? Like the what was it, the ZBB, the zero what was
yeah,
explain that.
Yeah, so there was so Anheuser-Busch in the US, it got taken over by InBev, and InBev was, again, this business that owned kind of the Brazilian beer market, the European beer market with brands like Stella, Hoegaarden, and Left, but they were famous for a concept known as zero-based budgeting. Right. And to me, a lot of this was sort of just running good business practices. They kept cost relatively low and relatively lean. How do they do that? I mean, some things, it was like, I don't know, they always said like the printers to like black and white ink and printing on double sides. So you weren't necessarily having color ink and printing a ton of things, all things like that. Other things were might have gotten a little bit excessive, but that was the exact opposite about how Anheuser-Busch operated as a business. Anheuser-Busch, it was everybody had lavish offices, everybody had company cars. The company owned, I think, 8 helicopters, 10 private jets. I mean, a bunch of boats they would entertain on. They owned Busch Gardens and SeaWorld, at the time when
Yeah.
they were taking over.
Yeah.
So they owned all of these kind of big assets, and it wasn't unheard of that when you were entertaining clients, I mean, you'd have $1,000 bottles of wine and the nicest steakhouses, and that's just how the company operated. And then, so when InBev came in, they said, well, we're a beer company, and do we really need to have all these helicopters? Do we need to have all the planes? Do we need to have the boats? Do we need to own SeaWorld? And then do we really need to be doing $1,000 bottles of wine at dinner? And the answer was actually like, no, you really don't. And so they actually took the profit margins of the company, which were Anheuser-Busch in 2008, they did about 25% profit margins. And within 3 years, even though their beer volume stayed relatively flat, they were doing 40% EBITDA margins within 3 years. So their profit margins went up from 25% to 40%. And nothing had really changed except sort of the management philosophy around cost control. And so some of that, I think some of that was good. I think some of the problems they got into was it's more so on the marketing side. And I think that the Anheuser-Busch did an incredible job just cultivating an amazing group of marketers over the years, many of them from the Midwest that really understood the American consumer, understood American humor. And pretty quickly you had InBev came in and they brought in a lot of their own marketers, people that were from Belgium, people that were from China, people that were from Brazil. And a lot of folks, like, they just didn't really get the US or the US consumer. And there was a lot of problems that started early on. I think that Anheuser-Busch won the Super Bowl Ad Meter Award, I think 10 straight years from like 2003 to, I can't remember like when maybe 2013. But even those first like 3 or 4 years after having taken over, they had still a lot of Americans that
Right.
were marketing. And then all of a sudden, as soon as they brought in the Brazilians, as soon as they brought in the Belgians, they started losing all those awards. The campaigns weren't very good. Consumers started to be lost. Market share started to get lost. So they just couldn't figure it out. And your earlier point, InBev used to come to the US and used to actually copy a lot of what Anheuser-Busch did because they were real marketing leaders, understanding customers, how to connect, how to sell. And then once all of a sudden they lost a lot of those marketing people, they were kind of looking around hopeless. But what do I do now? What do I turn to now? And I think even one of the quotes that one of the Anheuser-Busch board members had in the 2016, 2017 timeframe was that, we bought these iconic brands thinking they would last forever. And then, they didn't think that you really even have to continue to be disruptive and innovative, and they would just last forever. And that's just not the case with brands. You have to continue to attract new consumers and be within sort of the marketing zeitgeist. And that was not really in InBev's DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems like, I guess, like, as a consumer, probably a lot of Americans don't think too much about how much goes into keeping Bud Light so ubiquitous, right? But as you reveal in the book, it takes a lot of work, a lot of thought, a lot of collaboration on multiple levels.
The company spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year on
a lot of money,
just to literally, maintain or like slightly grow their market share.
Yeah.
Because if you think about a product like beer, it's actually a pretty commoditized product.
Yeah.
You're talking Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, to 95% of the people taste the exact same. And then really the only thing that differentiates it is the brand itself.
Yes.
And then so as soon as you lose what that brand is and what that brand was, it's very easy for consumers to switch over to a Miller Lite or a Coors Light, because everywhere you can buy Bud Light, you can also buy those brands, usually in the same configuration, 6-packs, 12-packs, draft beer, and at the same prices.
So let's get back to the Mulvaney fiasco again. The whole idea. So you were gone, actually. You had just left about a year, right? About a year before that. I feel like you were sort of in the back seat of this car that somebody was just driving toward a cliff, and you just jumped out at the right time before they actually drove it over the cliff. But it was a marketing VP. We actually brought up Andy Goller before, who you described as a legend. He had just left too, I think in 2022, and then she replaced him. Alyssa Heinerscheid replaced him, and she's the one who came up with the idea to send this can to Dylan Mulvaney. Now, I'm wondering about it. Something like that, I guess it seemed like a bit of a new approach, just doing that sort of commemorative can or something, like leaving aside even the just the nature of who it was going to and whatnot. Was doing commemorative cans something that Bud Light had been doing, or was that in itself new?
No, I mean, so Bud Light had always kind of done commemorative cans for certain things. They would do commemorative cans to celebrate usually team championships. So I remember one year when I was running our Southeast business unit, and the Tampa Bay Lightning, they won the NHL
Stanley Cup.
championship.
Yeah.
So we did they called them Bud Lightnings. And so they were like specialty Bud Lightning cans for the Tampa Bay Lightning. We did them for certain sports teams. They had worked with certain musicians before to do specialty kind of musician cans. But I would think that so it wasn't that unheard of. But we never really did cans for more, I call it more political or politicized figures. You kind of always stayed away from either politicians or people that were generally associated with more political issues.
Yeah.
So and so that was always an issue. And I think that was really what the problem was with Dylan. And even if you think about that week, because a lot of times you have to remember the context. This was 2 years
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
but this was so again they did the partnership on April Fool's Day of 2023.
Yeah.
And the week leading up to that, that's when you have a lot of in state houses. You have a lot of the state kind of legislative cycles and legislations. And I think there were 25 bills across the state that were looking to ban biological men from competing against women in sports. There were also a bunch that were trying to ban gender affirmation care that were going on that month. And then also in the week leading up to it, you might remember this, but there was a transgender shooter that killed, I think,
Yes. Oh
seven
yeah,
or
of
eight
course.
people
In Nashville. Yeah.
in Nashville. That happened 3 or 4 days before this as well.
Yeah.
And
Amazing timing.
I mean, even NBC News essentially said that whether you're on the left or the right, on the right side you're talking about transgendered issues could have contributed to this, and then on the left they're talking about how it's transphobia that contributed to this. But there was all these issues called around this just transgenderism that week. And so then all of a sudden, when Bud Light all of a sudden drops this partnership with Dylan Mulvaney, they couldn't have done it at a worse time where everyone was thinking, like, wait, what is going on? This was, slightly after as well. If you call the lead up to this, maybe it was a year, about a year earlier, when Disney did the partnership, or not the partnership, but when Disney really got involved in the parental rights issues down in Florida, and people were really questioning like Disney and parental rights issues in Florida, and why are you guys getting involved in this so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill? People were
Yeah.
frustrated with that.
Yeah.
People have been frustrated with Nike getting involved with the Colin Kaepernick issues. One of the reasons I talk about in the book, like actually why I left Anheuser-Busch, is I want to do a simple distribution agreement with Black Rifle Coffee Company.
Yeah.
And, Black
Yeah.
Rifle Coffee Company, whose mission is to serve coffee and culture to firefighters, first responders, the military, police officers, and people who love America. But I was told by our legal team that we couldn't do it because it was too so-called controversial.
Crazy.
So like I think a lot of people were just feeling this, why are all these conservative voices being shut down? Why are businesses continuing to get involved in progressive and social issues? And then Bud Light became essentially the straw that broke the camel's back. That when Bud Light all of a sudden that week was putting Dylan Mulvaney's face on a can, and why Dylan had become so controversial is Dylan had just celebrated this 365 days of I think it was girlhood or womanhood,
Yes.
where Dylan kind of documented her transition from a biological male to a female, but didn't get rid of any body parts. It was just, I now identify as a female.
Right.
And during that time period, Dylan was at the Joe Biden White House. I mean, advocating for gender affirmation care, advocating for men to compete against women in sports. And Dylan had already become sort of a lightning rod person for a lot of conservatives that thought that she was being demeaning to women and to females and to their experience. And then all of a sudden, so when Bud Light did that partnership, it would have been the equivalent of almost Bud Light doing a partnership with Donald Trump for people on the left.
Sure.
And that was not an area that Bud Light had ever played in. And that's why it just became so controversial of an issue.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was starting to ask about whether those sort of cans had been done before. I guess they had been, but the timing of everything was so bad. How many people actually were involved in the decision? For something like a can to happen like that, I would imagine at a company like Anheuser-Busch and at a brand like Bud Light, sort of the way you describe in the book, it seems like there would need to be a lot of sign off on something like that, and people would be aware of the fact, for instance, of how politically charged the issue had become, and even just the shooting, right, happening 4 days before would have been enough to say, hey, let's at least delay this for a month until that tragedy passes.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is there's a lot of people that have to be involved because I was at Anheuser-Busch and, I know this. I mean,
Yeah,
for us to do any partnership agreement, it had to have legal review and sign off and corporate social responsibility, and the brand teams had to take a look at it. So therefore, it easily would have had to have gone to the entire Bud Light brand team and Alyssa Heinerscheid, who was the VP of Bud Light, because she's going to sign off on everything that
yeah,
the brand is doing. Might have gone above her to her boss, who was in charge of kind of not only Bud Light, but then some of the other kind of core brands that the company was doing. Definitely
yeah,
would have needed legal sign off because everything we did needed legal or external affairs. And one of the things that I kind of point out in the book is the hypocrisy of that same group that said that just doing again a simple distribution agreement with Black Rifle Coffee Company, putting them on the same trucks that Bud and Bud Light are, that was killed because that was too
yeah.
controversial. But that exact same group with the greenlit a Dylan Mulvaney partnership, which was seen as just not controversial at all. And I think that's where again you think about the company losing its center of gravity. I think if the company was still based in St. Louis, I think one, they would have done a distribution agreement with Black Rifle Coffee, and then two, they would not have done an agreement with Dylan Mulvaney, and they would be much better off as an organization these days. You wouldn't have seen the massive volume decline, the number of layoffs, and the share price plummet in the subsequent years.
So how many people would you estimate then had to sign off on that and take part in such a bad decision? I mean, I think Alyssa Heinerscheid gets a lot of the blame for it publicly, but I mean, this was anyone could have stepped in and said, "Hey, maybe we should not do this, or maybe we should wait 6 weeks." Right? So how many
Yeah, I mean,
people?
there were a bunch of people, but from my standpoint, yes, that was again part of the problem. But the bigger piece that we spoke about earlier was the company's response. And from the company's
Yes.
response, I mean, you're talking that probably went up to the board level. And it was like when I talk about Brendan being a cage monkey that had to perform, I mean, essentially, like that was a board level on down of, hey, this is what we're going to do and this is what we're going to say, because it became that big of a problem for the company and had lost the company billions of dollars of value. And so then all of a sudden, like you're talking about, I don't know, board level on down, you're talking,
Yeah.
I don't know, 50 to 100 people that are involved
Dozens. Yeah.
from board and the zone and global. And like, I mean, you're talking tons of people that are involved.
It's
And,
amazing.
it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Um, and I should say too, you obviously are very candid about Whitworth in the book, but you also sent a letter asking him to resign too as a shareholder. So he doesn't he knows you've got issues with him, I guess, right? You got beef
Yeah,
with Brendan.
and candidly, Brett and I had a fine relationship. We worked together
Yeah.
for 11 years. I knew him when I was in business school, and he promoted me twice. We were fine. I was with him the night he was promoted to CEO of North America. But I just think that it's sad that he has a fiduciary duty to do what's in the best interest of shareholders, and he clearly has not been able to do that over the last couple of years. He has been acting more in the best interest of certain stakeholders of the company, more
Right.
activist organizations, and not doing what's right. And if he had been doing and therefore that's a fiduciary breach of his duty. And I'm just of the mindset that there'd be someone much better to run that business here in the U.S. now that can actually clearly articulate what brands like Bud Light are going to be, what Anheuser-Busch is going to be. And I mean, even since that CBS interview, I don't think he's given a public interview since. And you're talking almost 2 years now. And if you're the
Yeah.
CEO of sort of a major organization here in the US, you need to be in this day and age going out and doing earned media, talking about your brands and evangelizing it. And he can't. And so that's problematic for many people. And myself being a shareholder of the company, that's problematic.
And
Um,
you still think he should be ousted?
oh, of course, because I don't think that at this point he can credibly come back and return sales in the US. So not only was in 2023, sales of the business plummeted. Sales last year in 2024 continued to plummet. And then even at the beginning of this year, you still have Bud Light sales down almost 10%. And the company's sales are down massively. The share price hasn't recovered at all during this time period. And I don't think that he's done a good job of turning the company around. And I just don't think that he's going to be able to. No, I think it's a broader issue that I think InBev should actually sell Anheuser-Busch in the U.S. back
Hmm.
to U.S. owners so they can credibly become an American company once again. You can put in a new CEO that's going to talk about how the company is going to be very clear about American values. I mean, meritocracy, and we're hiring the best and the brightest, and we're not getting involved in politics, and we serve, we have all these great brands that serve sort of different people, but they haven't done that yet. My guess is because again, Brendan was told to perform, and he just performed. And that's what gave him job security.
Yeah.
But I hold Brendan accountable, yes, but I also hold the board of directors and others accountable as well for the poor results over the last couple of years.
So who do you think would be a buyer for Anheuser-Busch in the US these days?
I would love if Warren Buffett did it. That to me makes tons of sense. Warren Buffett's sitting on $300 billion of cash. This looks like a brand that Warren Buffett should own, sort of a great American sort of brand that generates a lot of cash. And just if you think about in the US, they have, I don't know, they're generating about $4.5 billion of profits right now. So I don't know, they could probably sell that for an 8 to 10 times multiple. So you're talking 30 to $40 billion to buy the US business of Anheuser-Busch. So that's, about 10% of Warren Buffett's money. And if I was Warren, that's something that I would be taking a look at. So that to me would make a lot of sense. Then you put somebody in charge who can talk about where the company screwed up. You can apologize to the loyal consumers. You can articulate kind of a clear vision. And I think then you hit all the podcast circuits. I mean, you go on your show, Andrew, and, you're, the Rogans of the world and everybody else. And then I think you can actually make a great American comeback story, but it's not going to be with the current folks in place.
Yeah. Interesting. I want to talk about your childhood. What's amazing is that you were a fan of Bud Light from the age of 5 on. It was the Bud Bowl that kind of got you. I don't mean drinking Bud Light, but you were just a fan of the brand from a very young age. I mean, it was like it was, and then you went on to work for the company. It was almost like I think of I'm not really a big Yankees fan, but Anthony Volpe, the shortstop, grew up in North Jersey, huge Yankees fan. Now he's the shortstop for the team. That's kind of your story.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of living that dream a little bit, but I mentioned a lot. Literally, one of my first memories was when the Bengals were in the Super Bowl against the 49ers.
Yeah,
and that was actually the year that you had the first Bud Bowl. So that was for folks that are of our generation, you might remember you used to have Bud versus Bud Light. It was the first time ever that you had a company that did a commercial about the Super Bowl specifically for the Super Bowl. And it was this really cool kind of stop motion animation for Team Bud Light, Team Budweiser. They did a really cool sort of promotion as well, that if you kind of wrote down the score of the Bud versus Bud Light throughout the game, you could submit an entry to win, I think, $100,000.
Football fans, get ready for the battle of the century as unbeaten Budweiser takes on undefeated Bud Light. It's Bud versus Bud Light in Bud Bowl 1. Pick up your official scorecard wherever you see this display.
Hey, Bud, super idea. You see the neck on that guy?
Use it to follow the action and you could win big. So get ready, get set. On January 22nd, Bud Bowl 1. This time, it's for real.
I mean, sales skyrocketed. It was one of the best ad campaigns of that year. And then throughout really the 90s, I mean, Bud and Bud Light, I mean, they just nailed it every single year. You're talking about Real Men of Genius and the Budweiser Frogs and just killer commercials. And so I don't know, my parents, lucky enough, I don't know, I always thought it was cool, but my childhood bedroom, it looked like a bar. It had Bud and Bud Light. I mean, posters and signage and blow up inflatable NASCARs and blimps and really cool things kind of all over my room, and kind of brought a lot of that to college. And not that I'd ever thought about necessarily working for the company early on, but then when the opportunity arose, I don't know, kind of made sense a little bit. So anyway.
Yeah. The Bud Bowl was amazing. So I'm a little older than you. I remember it well. And I think they did about 8 of them. It went on well into the 90s. Yeah. Such a great idea. I mean, it was just to be clear about it, what it was. I think it was a series of maybe 6 commercials throughout that Super Bowl, 1989 Super Bowl, right?
Yeah,
and
no, that's
one was an update on how the game within the game was going, right?
That's it.
And I think what was it? I think you talked about it in the book. I think Budweiser won on like a walk-off field goal, right? As time was expiring. Like such a great, especially for a kid. I mean, I was 13 at the time. I loved it.
For the kickoff of Bud Bowl 1. Bud has won the toss. They'll receive.
Turn out their light.
Let's kick some Bud.
And we're underway. Bud takes it at the 18. Hands off to Bud.
He's at the 25, 30. Tearaway label.
He's looking for daylight.
Make that Bud Light. Hey, lighten up. Move your Bud.
Oh, we've got a real brouhaha.
The cans are going wild.
I'm out on the field. Stay tuned. We'll be back. Seconds left in the Bud Bowl. This is what it's all about. Tied at 24.
But it all rests on this bear's shoulders. Budsky, it's all yours. Come on, Budsky.
Who says kickers don't earn their money? The kick is up. It's good! In a storybook finish, Budweiser 27, Bud Light 24.
Wait till next year.
It was very cool. And then all the other commercials just hit as well. And the Anheuser-Busch, they sold over 100 million barrels of beer in the early 2000s. Actually, their sales peaked in 2008. And then now this year they'll sell around 60 million. So they've lost 40% of their volume over the last 15 years since InBev came in. So, and again, they weren't winning Super Bowl Ad Meter Awards. This is actually the first year in, I think, 10 plus years they'd won. They won with their Budweiser Clydesdale special delivery one this year. So yeah, I gotta give credit where credit's due. So Budweiser actually won it this year. It was the first time in 10 years they'd won that campaign. So to some degree that they're trying to bring their marketing back around. They're trying to build that back. But still, I don't think a lot of customers are going to turn around until they somehow admit they screwed up and there was a mistake.
You sort of have an emotional attachment to that brand, to the company. Then you went to work there and you did great things for them too. As a matter of fact, you did, you initially were sort of crunching numbers and getting prices down for all the raw materials that went into beer. Then you went on to lead the Western US sales region and then the Southeast, and like sales were always up under your watch. To then see what happened to the company. Was that hard for you? Like even on an emotional level, did you have some just despair over that? I mean, maybe not. I don't know, but
no, because I was at a company for over a decade, so I had tons of friends that were still working at Anheuser-Busch, and then I knew tons of folks who were wholesalers as well. So they have 500 independent family-owned wholesalers across the United States as well. And so it was terrible watching this company that I loved. I loved the brands and see brands that historically had stood for, I always say, like, American, a bottle, and fun and humor, and just kind of got it. And then all of a sudden seeing people lose jobs, suppliers go out of business. I had a lot of wholesalers calling me initially, and they were saying, man, can you please call up Michelle Ducaris and Brendan and let them know like why they're losing so much sales. Like, I just don't think they get it being in New York City as to why people are so upset and why their customers are revolted. Like, please give them a little bit of perspective. So yeah, it was definitely tough to see all of that. I think, again, it's been sad over the last kind of 2 years to see them not recover at all. Continue to have to shed jobs, and they even actually had to start selling some of their brewing capacity to Pabst Blue Ribbon and others. So there's a lot of sad things that have happened. I think it's a case study as to why when businesses get involved in again, more social progressive issues that aren't part of their mission, that's actually the least sustainable thing that a company could do, because nobody wants to see sales decline, share price decline, people get fired, shutting down breweries or production facilities. That's the least sustainable thing that a company can do.
In terms of villains in this book, it's ESG, it's DEI, and it's also Larry Fink of BlackRock, who was really the guy who pushed those ideas in the first place, or pushed them. I guess he sort of introduced it, I guess, to the U.S. market, right? I guess it was something already happening elsewhere, and even happening to some degree in the U.S., but not in the way that he introduced it and sort of forced it through like the sheer power of BlackRock and all of the assets that they control into corporate America.
No, and so that's sort of the broader narrative as well. And really, I think one of the things that the book really articulates is this ongoing discussion about what is the purpose of a company? Like, what does a company do? Who does a company serve? And there's really two competing views. There's this European view that companies, this is by the kind of Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum view, that companies are supposed to work with governments and activists and agencies to, solve all these so-called, social issues. Whereas in the US, we have a different view. We operate more under this sort of Milton Friedman view that the purpose of a corporation is really to serve its shareholders. Go out and innovate, make great products and services that customers want to buy, focus on that so you can drive more revenue, you can hire more people, you can do more innovation. That's what sort of the focus of business should be. And kind of both systems purport to do the same thing. Both systems purport to drive better kind of shareholder and stock market returns, and then also make the world a so-called better place. And I think that I just take a look at the last 40 years of history where, because, that's really since the 70s, you've had these two competing systems. I mean, the US stock markets have trounced Europe over the last 40 to 50 years in terms of broad-based market returns, where the US has returned about 10% a year versus Europe's around 6 or 7. To put that in perspective, if you had $100,000 in your 401k in 1970, it'd be worth $4.5 million today if you had it invested in the US. Whereas in Europe, it would only be worth about $1.5 million. So it's a huge difference there.
Huge.
But then I would also say that I don't think you look at Europe and you say like, wow, look at this amazing society or halcyon society they've created. Yeah. I mean, the US trounces Europe on GDP growth and per capita income, unemployment rates, on interest rates. And most of our poorest states that we have in the United States are wealthier than all the European states. People forget, outside of Paris or outside of London, like, a lot of Europe, the place you don't want to live. You wouldn't want to live with those sort of living standards. And so therefore, I'm just a big fan of sort of this American free market shareholder capitalism perspective, where let business focus on business, let politics focus on politics. Don't confuse the two, because it's bad for business, it's bad for returns, bad for shareholders, and bad for the democracy we live in.
Yeah. I want to talk too about the so we mentioned Andy Goeller. He was sort of a legend there, did a bunch of different jobs. I think 40+ year career, around 40 years at Anheuser-Busch. But he is the guy who was behind, or it happened under his supervision, the Dilly Dilly ads that were super. That was a resurgence for Bud Light when those hit in, I think, 2017, 2018. And so I wanted to bring those up because I loved those ads, for one thing. I actually have a shirt here.
Oh, I love it. You got the Dilly Dilly shirt.
So I got it for my kids, actually. I would have worn this, but it's too small, right? But my kids loved it. We loved it. We're watching, we watch football, obviously, together, NFL football, and they were just so funny. And we would be saying Dilly Dilly all the time for nonsensical reasons and whatnot. And it was just a great bonding thing. My kids were like, this is amazing. So I thought it would be funny to just get my kid a shirt to wear to school. He was in like 4th grade at the time. But that was a fantastic campaign. And it actually I think it did win an award, right? It got Bud Light back into the ad meter conversation again. And then just culturally, I mean, you went through and listed all the things that happened. It was like Ben Roethlisberger was using it as a snap count call. There was a bunch of other things I can't remember off the top of my head.
I mean, even Philadelphia, when they won the Super Bowl in 2017,
yes.
They literally had a play called Philly Philly.
Yes.
And it was off of the Dilly Dilly name, and that was that famous one where you had Nick Foles, whoever it was, like threw the pass and ended up catching it. It was a cool play called Philly Philly. And then Bud Light actually sponsored they had a statue outside of Philadelphia's field to memorialize the play, sponsored by Bud Light.
Yeah.
It was just cool. I mean, that whole sort of campaign about that medieval world that they had, where they had sort of the king and the wizards, and I mean, it was just magical. Those are the things that Bud Light used to do and used to bring together. That's what people want from Bud Light. It's beer to some degrees. It's an escape from reality. You want to relax. It's a little bit of you bring vacation into your own home. And so Bud Light had always created some of these, funny, fantastical, kind of worlds. And Andy Goeller, I think, got that. A lot of other people, unfortunately, didn't.
Sir Jeremy, you are a true friend of the crown. Dilly Dilly.
Dilly Dilly.
Madam Susan, you are an even truer friend of the crown. Dilly Dilly.
Dilly Dilly.
What is that?
This is a spiced honey mead wine that I have really been into lately. So, Dilly Dilly, right?
Please follow Sir Brad. He's going to give you a private tour of the Pit of Misery.
I'm sorry, what?
Pit of Misery. Dilly Dilly. Dilly Dilly.
Here's to the friends you can always count on. Bud Light, brewed to be America's favorite light lager.
That Philly, or that was called the Philly Special too. I'm a huge Eagles fan. Love that play. That propelled us to the organization's first Super Bowl win ever. So amazing. And I remember too at the time, they were tweeting a lot of Dilly Dilly every time for the next season. Actually, every time something good happened with the Eagles, Bud Light would be tweeting Dilly Dilly. So that was good. You in the book talk about one of your favorite commercials, which is the Ted Ferguson series, and I think that the Dilly Dilly and the Ted Ferguson have a little something in common. and that is that they didn't involve celebrities. They were just sort of simple ideas that were very funny and just resonated with people. What I actually like about the Ted Ferguson, they are super low budget. I don't know if you know what they, because that preceded your time there, but they were just they it looks like they were shot, by like they could have been shot, not to say they were, by like a college film crew or something. It was just super low budget, and that guy was very funny.
Yeah, I mean, kind of Ted Ferguson. For those that know, Ted Ferguson was the Bud Light Daredevil, and he would do these sort of like tongue in cheek sort of stunts. Some of them would be they were called like hey, on a Friday he would try and stay for an extra 5 minutes after work on a Friday, and then every time that he would do it, he would be exhausted, like oh, and then they'd have to kind of give him a beer to resuscitate him. And
Ted Ferguson, Bud Light Daredevil. Today for Bud Light, I'll attempt my most difficult stunt so far. I will stay 2 full minutes past 5 on a Friday.
Hey, Ted.
See you, Janice.
Hey, time!
Get him up. Ted, get up. Ted, can you hear me?
I need a Bud Light.
Don't you give up on me, Ted.
Refreshingly smooth Bud Light. Always worth it.
Put that on my review.
Oh, yeah.
he'd have to like listen to his girlfriend talk about her mom for 2 minutes, and then after 2 minutes he's like exhausted. His buddies get him and they get him a beer, and it was just sort of funny, kind of tongue in cheek. Your point, it was super low budget. And they were, if the people kind of remember, it was almost like the This Is Sports Center. It was like so simple, so easy, kind of like low budget. But I think just hit on a lot of the cultural things that the Bud Light drinker would. The Bud Light drinker tended to be that kind of 21 to 30-year-old, very male, male heavy type of drinker. But those were a lot of things you would think about. I think I was in college when a lot of those were going on, and having first relationships or having first jobs, and it was like you got it. On Friday you just want to hang out with your buddies, and saying 5 minutes after work on a Friday would be about the worst thing that could happen when you're 22, 23 years old, and you just want to get out of there. So they kind of got it.
I mean, another big one was the Bud Light swear jar. You obviously, I think you mentioned that one in the book too. That did that win an award? Didn't know that one. They actually didn't run during the Super Bowl.
They banned that from the Super Bowl, but it became really the first viral ad that was on YouTube. Yes. So a lot of those ads as well, those were kind of right before YouTube really became big and YouTube really hit, and there was a lot of I would say call it more everyday content that just individuals could submit. But those, to your point, I mean, those the Ted Fergusons, it almost felt like user generated content.
Yes.
It felt very organic. It felt very much not mass produced, not mass budget. And then the swear jar was, I think, just pretty good. And that was one where, it's just funny. It was just funny, humorous. And this is one where it's an office environment where anytime anyone swore, you'd have to put in a quarter or two. And then when they ask, what does the swear jar go to? It says, to buy Bud Light for the office. So everyone just starts swearing. And so it was pretty good. But yeah, it's funny that was banned from the Super Bowl, but because it was banned, it ended up going viral online because everybody wanted to see it.
Exactly. And probably actually helped it to some degree.
What's that?
That's a swear jar. Every time someone swears, you put a quarter in it.
Who gets the money?
I don't know. We'll use it to buy something for the office, like a case of Bud Light or something.
Fucking awesome. You, Bob.
You, Jim.
Eric, I have a bag on line 3 for you.
Can I borrow your pen? Can I borrow your pen?
Will the owner of a white station wagon please go yourself?
We're gonna go down there and we're gonna some. We're gonna some. We're gonna do whatever we have to because we're gonna some.
Poop.
Doesn't count.
Shut the up!
I am so proud of you mother suckers. Here.
Refreshingly smooth Bud Light. Always worth it.
And then, so going back to the 90s too, so this is crazy in light of what happened with Dylan Mulvaney. The Bud Light did a series of like cross-dressing ads. They did like Ladies Night, which were they were funny, but it was obviously so farcical, and also just a sign of the times that we were like much more humorous back then and much more like easygoing about things. What do you make of that? Like, obviously that could never happen today for a variety of reasons, but what do you think of that series? I think they did maybe 4 or 5 of them, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they could happen today. Because if you remember, like the '80s was a real kind of PC environment. There was a lot of political correctness in the '80s. In the '90s, you sort of saw a lot of pushback, where you had movies like PCU that kind of made fun of that movement, and you had American Pie, and then you had a lot of other kind of I'll call it un-PC movies that came out. And I think at that time with Bud Light, again, it was just funny and humorous. So they had a bunch of guys that dressed up as women so they could get ladies' night specials at the bar. And they just people loved it. The Bud Light consumer loved it. Sales were skyrocketing because it was just funny.
Yes.
And I don't know if they and
it was also so ridiculous. Like they weren't trying, they didn't actually look like women, right? They like had stubble and everything.
Beards,
and
mustaches.
It's just purely obvious that they were trying to like cash in on the ladies' night beer special.
That's it. And just get dollar beers or whatever the special was. And they weren't, it wasn't offensive to anybody.
Yeah.
People just got it. It's Bud Light, and they just got to be uniquely Bud Light.
Bud Light, please.
Tonight's ladies' night, and there's a special on Bud Light.
Oh, really?
If you want great taste that won't fill you up and never let you down, make it a Bud Light.
Oh no, it's Ted from accounting.
And that's what I think they were missing over the last couple of years. And even the partnership with Dylan Mulvaney, where Dylan's saying, "Oh, like what's March Madness? I just thought this was a crazy month. I didn't even know there was basketball." So it was so un-Bud Light and so just not something Bud Light would ever do. They were obviously catering to sort of activist organizations and others that wanted them to market to the LGBTQ plus community, which like I have no problem with that, but the way that they did it just wasn't Bud Light. And I don't know. Now they've gone back to I think what they probably should have done 2 years ago. They've hired Shane Gillis.
Yes.
I mean, it's funny that I think that without this Bud Light debacle that happened, I don't think they would have hired Shane Gillis because the legal department would have said, "Oh, I don't know, Shane Gillis, he'd been canceled, and I don't know." But Shane Gillis is Bud Light. I mean, he is a fratty, someone out of touch, which was Alyssa Heinerschneid's words to describe what the marketing was. And he's putting out a lot of good content and good commercials for Bud Light. I just think the problem is that the customers aren't going to come back unless it's accompanied with a mea culpa of, "Hey, we screwed up."
Yeah. So let me tell you. Can I tell you something? I have not had a sip of Bud Light since that happened, since that whole thing happened. And I'm not like a huge Bud Light drinker, but like I said, we got the Dilly Dilly shirt. I would say that Dilly Dilly is one of the very few times in my life where advertising has worked on me, and it actually drove a decision that I made to buy a product. And I don't know. I just, like you said, it was almost it's not so much anything having to do with Dylan Mulvaney, but it was the handling of the response. And like you said, her remarks about it being out of touch and fratty. I was like, out of touch. The last big ad campaign was Dilly Dilly. It was hilarious. And that's an objective opinion shared by almost the entire country. I just didn't know what she was talking about. It almost seemed like she was trying to be hostile or
almost like trying to wreck the brand. It was kind of crazy and just completely reckless.
Yeah.
And so it was I don't know, crazy.
So here's my question: have you had a Bud Light since all this happened?
No, I haven't. And the bigger thing is that whenever you order a Bud Light now it becomes like a political statement. And that was the whole thing. It's like anytime people order a Bud Light, you see it regularly. It's, "Oh, you ordered a Bud Light," or it becomes almost sort of like joke of and so therefore a lot of people, they don't order it because they don't want politics with their beer. Like they just want to drink a beer, or like Bud Light used to be about, again, having a funny joke or being with the in crowd or whatever else. But now it's almost as if you're making a political statement when you have one. It's the same thing as if you're wearing, I don't know, either a Joe Biden or a Donald Trump sticker. It just almost becomes a brand of just so associated with a certain political party that's alienated half the customer base. And so I haven't had a Bud Light in 2 years. No, I didn't have a ton of Bud Light beforehand. I don't know. My beer, I always like Budweiser more than Bud Light, and then more the.
I would say that too. In my younger years, I did, but Bud Light got a little better as I got older, and I just needed a lighter beer.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Yeah.
The diesel gets a little heavy
Yes.
after a while, so therefore you can go a little bit lighter. But no, I mean I haven't. I'd love to have one with I don't know, some of my old Anheuser-Busch colleagues and wholesalers in the future. So I'm sure that we will at some point.
Yeah.
But for the time being, it just this is something you just don't want to bring up at a party or others. I think given myself as well, if I started drinking Bud Light at a party, people would be like, "Hey, wait a minute," and it just becomes a conversation that I just
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to have on
Yeah.
Friday nights.
Yeah. I hear you. So, you know what I was thinking too? You mentioned in the book that I think I might have brought it up earlier that some people can't, no, I didn't bring it up yet, but some people can't even tell the difference between Bud Light, Coors Light, Miller Light, right? In a blind taste test, they don't even know the difference. So it struck me that the value proposition of Bud Light was never the beer itself. It was actually the marketing content, the commercials that we were just talking about over the years, the Bud Bowl, every Dilly Dilly, all the way up to Dilly Dilly, right? That is all the value prop. And I think that was what was so, she was so cavalier about, like just throwing the whole value proposition like right out the window. And I don't know, I guess hoping that people's allegiance to the taste of Bud Light, that they can't even tell the difference between Miller Lite would somehow carry them through. I don't know.
No, yeah, and so it's really interesting, but consumer boycotts they very rarely work, but Bud Light was very uniquely susceptible because when they do work, there's two reasons. One is when they're easily substitutable products. So as we spoke earlier, I mean, again, most people can't tell the difference between Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, and at every gas station, grocery store, and bar you go to, they almost all have Miller Lite, Coors Light, Bud Light. But then secondarily, boycotts can be sustained when people feel like they're having an impact. And what's interesting about the beer industry is because sales are through places like Walmart and Kroger and 7-Eleven. They're not really online. All of that data gets reported to large sort of data aggregators every week. And so every week, the news continue to report that Bud Light sales are down 10%, 20%. 30%, and they just continue to maintain being down. And people on social media were sharing you probably remember these. You go to a baseball game, the Coors Light line would be 20 people deep. There would be anybody at the Bud Light line. So it just became this sort of social media storm that fed on itself. And Anheuser-Busch, they couldn't starve the data. When people were upset at Disney, 2 years ago, but man, there's only one Disney World. And for your kids, like, you're probably gonna think of Disney World, even though you don't necessarily like when Disney gets involved in Florida politics, but you're going to probably go to Disney World. And then also, you're not reporting on a weekly basis what Disney World's attendance numbers or revenue or those are. And so that's why Disney was able to kind of, somewhat skate through a lot better than Bud Light was, or the NFL. A lot of people didn't like when Collar Kaepernick and others, they were kneeling on the sidelines, or NFL got involved in a lot of political stuff. But, on Sundays, if you want to watch football, what are you going to do? You only have the NFL. That's it. You don't really have any other alternatives. So that's why viewership remains at record highs, despite a lot of people not liking the politics.
Yeah. So I know you got to get going in a couple minutes, but couple more things. You, at the end of the book, and I won't say what it is because we want people to read it and whatnot, but you lay out a plan to restore trust in Anheuser-Busch and shareholder capitalism. You give them some pretty good ideas. So I'm wondering, do you want to go back there? Is that something like, would you go back and implement this, or I guess you mentioned earlier, you hope that it would be sold. If it were sold, would you go back under those circumstances and try to implement that and try to turn this whole thing around?
I mean, I don't think that the current ownership they'll have me back. They probably should, because I think I'd probably do a better job than Brendan. But and then if it was sold, I mean, I got other things going on right now, so you never say never to certain opportunities. But I'm pretty excited with what I have going on at Strive and Athletic Capital and some other startups I'm involved in. So again, I mean, you never say never. But that was, I think, a chapter of my life. I loved it. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. But I got other things going on now. But I mean, you never say never. But Right now, I got other stuff I'm working on.
Yeah. So speaking of the other things, one of them is Strive Asset Management, which you launched with Vivek Ramaswamy. And that's why you left Anheuser-Busch. You left to launch that. You kind of saw the writing on the wall. You saw that things were where things were headed there, and you got out and you launched that. And sort of the purpose of that company is to try to force companies to do what they wouldn't do at Anheuser-Busch. And so how's that going so far?
Yeah, it's going great so far. It's interesting when I left Anheuser-Busch, it wasn't the current thing at the time to ask for companies just to focus on their mission,
Yeah.
to stay out of social and political issues. I mean, if you recall at the time, there were companies getting involved in defunding the police initiatives
Yes.
or asking to overturn election integrity laws or getting involved in a lot of the transgendered issues or making statements on Roe v. Wade. And that just didn't really sit well with me. It just didn't make a ton of sense. Now, again, that wasn't the current thing to do then. A lot of people, essentially said, "Man, like you guys are crazy for asking companies to stick to their mission." But I think it was the right thing to do. And it's funny how far, in 3 years now we've come, where I think that things have swung back, and we've seen companies, unfortunately, be like Bud Light that has lost tons of customers. Target has lost tons of customers.
Yeah.
We saw Google when they rolled out their Gemini AI project. It's
man.
a huge hit. When you would type into the search engine, like, I don't know, show me pictures of Nazi soldiers, and they would have like Black and Asian women. I mean, it was just like silly because they had put in these like diversity, equity, inclusion, and DEI filters. I mean, people saw how bad things were getting. Mark Zuckerberg has recently been on podcasts talking about how the Biden administration was curtailing free speech and asking him to take down information. And so these are sort of the things that when Vivek and I were launching Strive, we were talking about a lot. We were talking about, hey, like, we just want companies here in the US to focus on their mission, focus on great products, services, technology, innovation. That's what's made this country great. That's what's created the economic living conditions that we've had, the great prosperity. And so we are going to create a new asset management company that is going to invest into companies and advocate and articulate those values. So, we kind of differentiate ourselves from the firm BlackRock, the world's largest asset management company, that was pushing more of this ESG, DEI, stakeholder capitalism agenda. And our whole thing was that we're just not going to do that. We are going to be pro-American free market shareholder capitalism. We thought we'd be a better fiduciary to what we believe is the vast majority of Americans that I think believe the same. They just want business to stick to business, stay out of a lot of these issues. And now we manage a couple $1 billion worth of assets, a few years later, which is great.
So it turns out if you have money invested in the market, it's probably done through a wealth manager or a 401k account plan administrator, or if you work for the government through a pension fund. And I think there's some really simple questions for Americans to ask. Was my money used to vote in favor of a racial equity audit at one of those companies? Was my money used to vote in favor of an emissions cap? Was my money invested in an ESG fund that excludes oil and gas or firearms or other sectors? And I think a lot of people, Steve, are in for a rude surprise. They're going to get the answer that, yes, their money actually was invested after their financial advisors look into it. But I think that knowledge is a good thing because then people can be empowered to make decisions with their own money to say that I don't want to advance those social agendas with my money. I'm empowered.
One of the fastest growing exchange traded fund organizations, which is exciting. I've spun out a private equity fund from that called Athletic Capital that invest into this next generation of consumer brands that are taking a lot of share from the Anheuser-Busch's and from firms like whether it's Disney or Target or others. So we have that going and involved in a couple other startups as well. So having a lot of fun. So it's been a fun journey over the last couple of years.
And part of it too was, I mean, you went after Mark Benioff of Salesforce, right? So and trying to get him to roll back some of these woke policies that they had.
It feels very political what you're doing, is it not?
Well, Sarah, that's a great question. We're actually not doing something that's political. And we've already been able to have major changes in corporate America with stakes even smaller than we've had in Salesforce at companies like Exxon and companies at Disney. And so we wrote a letter to Salesforce on behalf of our shareholders where we're looking to unlock value beyond what the traditional activists have already done. We believe that one of the overlooked pieces is the political nature that Salesforce has done and how that is detractor to shareholder value. If you take a look at Mark Benioff, he's one of the biggest proponents of stakeholder capitalism and the ESG movement, whereas his actual fiduciary responsibility is to actual shareholders, which is required under Delaware law, which is where Salesforce is incorporated. So on behalf of our investors, we wrote a letter to Salesforce asking them to do away with some of the political culture that's taken away from value and move to one that's more performance-based.
Yeah, it's really funny. So Mark's made a big about face, I feel, with the current administration. But 2 years ago, Mark Benioff was one of the people that was a big believer in stakeholder capitalism, and he was donating hundreds of millions of dollars to initiatives like defunding the police and overturning the election integrity laws and getting involved in every single social and political issue imaginable. To the point, I mean, he even had weekly meetings. I think they were called Woke Wednesdays that he had at
Oh my God.
Salesforce,
Oh
where
God.
internally employees would discuss woke initiatives they were working on. And our big feedback to Mark was, Mark, I mean, this is your stock price is plummeting. At the time, it was in the dumps. They had underperformed the S&P 500, underperformed a lot of their peers. And our point was like, how are any of these activities that you're doing actually contributing to Salesforce's mission, which is supposed to be to connect companies and customers? That's what you guys are supposed to be doing. But all of these policies are incredibly divisive, and you're actually dividing a lot of companies and customers. So why don't you guys get back to business? So we kind of engaged with Mark, and subsequently Salesforce has been doing a lot better. And it's funny now, Mark is talking about how, Salesforce stays out of a lot of these issues, and Salesforce is focused on its bottom line. And so I think that we've not only engaged with Mark Benioff, we've engaged a lot of companies. I've engaged an oil and gas company, asked them to produce oil and gas. We've engaged with Disney to just focus on family content.
Wow.
We've engaged with, tons of companies over the last couple of years, and we feel like we're getting corporate America back focused on business. I think that's going to be good for a lot of the workers, a lot of the customers. It's going to be good for American innovation. I think it's going to be good for long-term American prosperity, and who knows, keeping the American dream alive a little bit as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so Benioff was doing that, and he was doing it, I guess, before the election. Did he start this change before the election, though? Or
it was really after the election.
After the election,
really after the election, he's really started dialing things back, and now is now trying to become more of this. I don't know, Salesforce. Like, we weren't involved in any of that stuff historically, so it's interesting because Salesforce was one of the worst as well. I mean, they had a lot of diversity quota systems. I mean, hard quotas in terms of who they were going to hire based off of race, sex, gender. Which it's frankly, it was illegal then, and it's illegal now. So they were one of the worst offenders. So they're dialing it back, but it was really after the election.
And a lot of companies are retreating from those DEI policies and whatnot, but a lot of them didn't before the election, right? A lot of it has just been since the election. But I mean, one person who did long before the election was Elon Musk. What do you think? What do you think about his ability to do it? A, to have the courage to do it, and then B, just the impact his doing it had on things, on culture, on even the election.
I give Elon Musk, when you talk about courageous, this is somebody that had everything going in the world. He was the world's richest person, the darling of people essentially on the left and the right, for some of the companies that he had created. And he did not need to spend $40 billion of his own capital to go buy Twitter to turn it into a free speech platform. But thank God that he did, because who knows? I mean, we never would have seen the Twitter files. We never would have seen sort of Twitter that was collaborating with the government. They were censoring speech. And I mean, who knows where we'd be right now if you still had people getting kicked off of Twitter and LinkedIn and Google for expressing different viewpoints. Yeah. And so, I mean, kudos to Elon Musk and kind of what he did. And kudos to him as well for continuing to put his money where his mouth is and working for what he believes is getting America back on a better path. I do feel a little bit bad for Tesla shareholders because they are they're suffering a little bit with Elon there.
If you got in early enough, you're okay right now.
You're still okay. And the thing I always mention as well is, what would you prefer? Would you prefer Elon Musk being the CEO of Tesla or somebody else? Because what he's doing right now with the government's temporary, but I want Elon Musk as the head of Tesla long term. I'm betting on Elon Musk that he's going to do a better job of creating real value than anybody else that they could find to be the head of Tesla.
Big time. Do you drive a Tesla?
I don't know. I still have range anxiety, so I still like to be able. Yeah. So. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, let me tell you something. I've had one for 3 years, and the range anxiety goes away quick.
Okay, got it. I mean, I still drive up to Columbus and back a decent amount, so therefore.
How long of a drive is that?
It's about round trip. It's like 250 miles. About
you're pushing it. You're gonna have to supercharge at some point,
especially in the wintertime as well in Ohio. Yeah. So anyway, so it's kind of pushing there. And then even I don't know, going out to Indianapolis and back. So I don't know. It's I just don't like the range piece, but I have nothing against it. At some point, I hope to get an electric vehicle. I also like SUVs, and I don't really like the Tesla. They don't really have an SUV Tesla, so that's my other issue with Teslas. I've always driven SUVs.
Yeah, I hear you. It's good though. Let me tell you, unbelievable driving experience. Forget the electric, forget and what it's doing for the environment or not doing. You know what I mean? It's just an amazing driving experience, I think.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this has been a great conversation, and your insights are amazing. The book is great. Once again, Last Call for Bud Light. I enjoyed it so much. I wish you nothing but success with it. And I appreciate you coming on and talking with me all about it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Andrew. Really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely fun. And keep in touch. Let's do this again sometime. Maybe when Bud Light or when Anheuser-Busch is sold back to Warren Buffett, we can chat about what's next then.
There we go. Sounds good.